Welcome to Lair the Alchemist in another edition of Sabbath Sunday. This is where we get together on Sundays to talk all things Black Sabbath. And for this episode, we have a special guest with us. Joining us is author Martin Popoff. Martin Popoff has written well over 100 books on heavy metal. He has written more reviews on music than any person on this planet and beyond. And he's also a big Black Sabbath fan that has written a number of Black Sabbath books. These were, I think, his earlier ones here: Black Sabbath Doom Let Loose and Black Sabbath FAQ. These, unfortunately, are out of print, but if you don't have these, pay whatever price you need to get these because they are awesome. And these are his most recent ones, and these are still in print. This is Black Sabbath in the 70s and Black Sabbath in the 80s and the 90s. And Martin also has a brand new book that he just put out, Dream Evil, Dio in the 80s. So I'm going to be leaving a link down below to Martin's website where you can go and get more information on Martin and where you can order all of his books. So Martin, thank you for joining us here on Sabbath Sunday.
No worries. Sounds fun. Let's do it.
All right. Well, the topic for today, this was a real challenge. This one, I was, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. My wife had to calm me down because making this was a tough list to put together. We decided to do our 10 favorite Ozzy and Sabbath records, but we're starting from 1980. So that means we're doing when Ozzy's solo career started in 1980 with Blizzard of Oz, and we're starting with Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. Those are the albums that are fair game for this countdown. This is not easy to do. We are all big, huge Black Sabbath and Ozzy fans here. So if our number 10 is your number one, don't get upset. We all love it anyways. We're all fans here. And it's kind of fun because in 1980 was when Ozzy went solo. Black Sabbath, of course, had Ronnie James Dio in the band. So yeah, there was some competition there. There was some darts being thrown back and forth in the press at each other. So this is going to be a really fun exercise here. So, all right, so let's get started. Martin, you're the guest here. What do you got for your number 10 album?
Okay, so I started with Seventh Star. I thought they did a pretty good job with that. Obviously, Glenn Hughes is on vocals, but it's got In for the Kill, got great drumming on it, great production, a lot of variety. You got a slow bluesy one. You got a pretty decent, creditable power ballad type one on there. I just thought it was a pretty good album, quite artistic. It seemed like it was pretty considered. They worked it out well. I mean, it sounds. Yeah, I mean, obviously it was going to be a Tony solo album, but it sounds enough like a Sabbath album. I think the riffs are pretty inspired. So that's my number 10.
Cool. Darren, your number 10?
That was a good choice. You won me over already.
Right.
Coming in at number 10 for me is, it may come as some surprise because I've had a lot of negative things to say about this record, but number 10 for me is Born Again. I guess through our recent discussions, as recent as last night, and some deep analysis, I've kind of turned a corner with Born Again. I've been listening to it a lot, and the production notwithstanding, it still is problematic for me, but I've really gotten into the songs. Great songs, bad production. I like the heavy, dark feel of the record. I also appreciate the fact that we're coming out of the Dio era where things are a little bit more restrictive and controlled. And I get a feeling when I listen to Born Again that there's a much looser 70s kind of vibe. And I don't think I picked up on that as much in the earlier days. I mean, I've had the album since it came out, but more recently, I've noticed that. And it's one of the reasons I've been attracted to it recently. So number 10 for me is Born Again.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, we have an episode we just recorded with John McEntee from Incantation. We recorded it last night. That's going to be coming up on a future Sabbath Sunday. So look out for that. All right, my number 10. This may be the only really kind of big surprise on my list, but my number 10 is Down to Earth from Ozzy. I've always liked this record. I think it's a dark horse album in his catalog. It gets overlooked. For me, it's the last Ozzy album that I really like. It has kind of a throwback sound to it, coming off of the very slickly Aerosmith-like production of Osmosis. This is more stripped down. It's more straightforward. The riffing is very Sabbathian at times. I just think there's a lot of great songs on here. Gets Me Through. There's a line in Gets Me Through that I just love when he does the feelings that I hide behind sometimes are really unkind. That melody that he sings there is so classic Ozzy. It just brings me right back to like, man, could have been on Blizzard or Diary. Zach is very tight and restrained on this. I've heard Zach talk about how the producer Tim Palmer sort of forced them to dial back the pinch squeals and stuff like that. Thank you, Tim Palmer. We all owe you a debt because it works here. It's I just love the songs on it. The ballad, Running Out of Time. I love when Ozzy does these dark ballads. It's just a real hidden gem for me in the Ozzy catalog. And I've always liked this album. The songs never get played in concert really after this tour. So it's an album that I can kind of come to often and find some nice hidden gems and ear candy in it. All right, we're on number 9. What do you got for number 9, Martin?
Well, I actually just made an audible and made a switch like literally 15 minutes ago. So my number 9, I'm going with this. I switched it with my number 8. So I'm going with No Rest for the Wicked. I've always loved this album. I've always liked it way more than Ultimate Sin. First one for Zach, but there's some really kind of Jake style stuff on here. Tattoo Dancer is kind of Bark at the Moonish. I love Bloodbath in Paradise, and I'd say Miracle Man is up there with all my favorites from the first couple and Bark at the Moon. Actually, my favorites are, well, I shouldn't give it away, but my favorites are the second and the third. So Miracle Man though is way up there. Like I love it better than anything off of Ultimate Sin. But playing a little bit of this, I hate the production on Ultimate Sin, but on this, it's actually still kind of there. That the big soupy reverby drum sound is still sort of there. I always felt it was reined in a little better and a little bit tighter, but there's going to be a theme I'll mention throughout as we go, but definitely this I thought was a good correction from the previous album. So I'm going to go with No Rest for the Wicked. Cool.
Darren, you're number 9.
Okay, number 9 for me is No More Tears. I like the album. I think it's a good record. I like the fact that Bob Daisley is on board. I also appreciate the fact that it was the last gasp of, I guess you could say, traditional heavy metal hard rock before grunge really put a stranglehold on things. 1991 was the era of like Wayne's World, and Alice Cooper, I think, had recently put out Trash. So it was kind of like the last gasp of this style of music before things would change pretty profoundly. But as far as the record itself, there's a lot of things I appreciate about it. I like the production. It's a little bit slick, but it's not too slick. I think the songs are good. I think that there's a lot of variety in the material. And it basically, it's Ozzy entering the 90s, and there is a bit of a stylistic shift, and it's noticeable, and I appreciate it because I think it's relevant to what I wanted to hear and some of the other things that were going on at the time. So I like the album. I guess basically it's not one that I reach for very often, but when I was compiling this list and looking at everything in an overview, I couldn't leave it off because I think it does have some significance and it belongs in the top 10 for me.
Cool.
Nice.
Okay, my number 9 is I'm going the same as Martin here, 1988's No Rest for the Wicked. Ozzy maybe flew a little too close to the hair metal sun and decided to back off a little bit here and come back down to earth. I think Zach interjects a lot of energy on this. I'm with you, Martin. Miracle Man is one of his best songs, opens the album. Great. You still have Bob Daisley on here helping with the arrangements. And there's just a lot of Fire in the Sky is an awesome song. Tattoo Dancer, Demon Alcohol. The album just has a ton of energy to it. You're right, the drums are a little boxy and electronic sounding at times, but kind of the guitar makes up for it for me. The guitar here is pretty ripping. And it's just a record that I always like. I always appreciated the energy from it, and Ozzy sort of. I like the Ultimate Sin, but again, he was getting a little bit. The production on that one is off off for me, and I think he corrects it here. And there's just a lot of songs that I really like on here, and a lot of cool, great riffing. So, all right, that was my number 9. So we are on number 8, and we're back to Martin.
All right, so my number 8. I went with Dehumanizer. The funny thing, thinking about this list, I don't think either of these bands are very creative or truly artistic or doing things for the sake of art throughout either of these two catalogs at this point. They're just good bands searching for decent enough songs to put together an album, sort of thing. It's kind of hard to explain. Like when we talked about doing this, I realized that if we were to include everything, I would have probably put everything from the 70s in there, or most of it in there. But having said that, and also I'm going to lean a little bit towards Black Sabbath being the more artistic and less LA and less considered and managed band, and managed by the label band out of all of them. And this one really fits that theme. It's an album, when I play it, I'm still kind of the same way, where I only like about half the songs a lot. All the up-tempo ones. I love TV Crimes, and what's the other one? Eye's pretty good, but TV Crimes and Time Machine, actually, the two biggest songs on it, I just love to death. It's got that kind of extreme Mac production on it. To me, this is a shadow album of Dio's Strange Highways and Lock Up the Wolves. It's starting that era, or it's right in, it goes Lock Up the Wolves, it goes Dehumanizer, then Strange Highways, and then he stays on that slow path all the way through, even including the Heaven and Hell band. So this is quite an artistically fearless album, I think, out of most of these that we're going to talk about. It's just one that not a lot of people love, and I don't love it either, because it is very raw and it's very slow. But it's I like how, when I think of all these other Ozzy albums, they just seem so LA around something like this. So I had to put it up there. So I just flipped it with no rest, just like I say a little while ago after playing the two again. So there you go.
Nice. All right, Darren, you're number 8.
Number 8 for me, and this might also be a bit of a surprise because I've been pretty vocal about not really being that crazy about this record. But in the grand scheme of things, it did make my top 10, and the album is Headless Cross. I've complained about the slick production, the kind of blurred line there is between Sabbath and White Snake, more contemporary hard rock. It loses some of the Sabbath vibe and moves into what I would consider to be more of a generic 80s mood vibe overall. But the thing that puts it in my top 10 was where it is in history. During the 80s, I think that it really established a definitive Black Sabbath aesthetic with the title track and When Death Calls. And I think for those two songs alone, I think it's pretty significant in Black Sabbath's discography, but I thought it was significant enough to put in my top 10. And I don't hate the album. I just think that as a Black Sabbath album, it's a little, I don't know how to describe it. It's just a little bit too mainstream, I guess. But with those two songs, it made it into my top 10 on the strength of those two alone. So nice. Headless Cross.
Yeah, this was a really hard list to make. I felt bad leaving off certain records. I was just like,
I try to be fair about it.
But when you really sit down and you really put yourself against the wall and really start nitpicking, it's fun. All right, my number 8, and Darren called this one earlier, is Born Again. And I love the way John McCanty there described it as this production is like a fog, and you get trapped in the fog of it, and I totally agree with it. It's a cold English winter day, overcast, drizzling rain in a cemetery, especially the first side of this record, man. Disturbing the Priest, one of Tony's strangest and heaviest riffs. Trashed is fun. Zero the Hero, the main riff in that is just pummeling. The 13-year-old me when this came out was creeped out and scared by those little instrumentals like The Dark and Stonehenge. Keep It Warm is one of my favorite Black Sabbath deep cuts. Born Again is also cool. Digital Bitch and Hotline, maybe I could live without those. Those are a little mediocre for me, but it's just an album that when you're in the right mood for it, it is a bizarre production. You really have to kind of, just let it engulf you and just go along for the ride. But it's just an album that it just has a certain mood for it, and it sits in a really kind of by itself in the Sabbath catalog. It's like it has its own corner in the room or something. It's just this weird little oddity that makes you wonder, like, what if they had gone on with this lineup or not. And I love I know some people don't love this cover, but the 13-year-old me just, it just ticked off all the boxes. Devil Baby, creepy font on the back, it just works for me. And it's another album that they never played any of these songs after this tour. So I'm not burnt out on any of these songs. It's an album that I can just sort of throw on and I don't feel burnt out on anything from it. So that's my number 8. We are on number 7.
Okay. My number 7, I went with The Eternal Idol. Always been my favorite of the Tony Martin years. As I've always said, I just feel like all the best songs fell on this one. They're all kind of the same thematically. The production changes a little here and there, but I don't see a huge difference between the Tony Martin albums, except I really love all the songs on this one. I don't like most of the songs on a lot of the other ones, but yeah, there's some riffs on here that are so melodic, and the chord sequences, Glory Ride, Born to Lose, they sound to me like really sorrowful, dark new wave of British heavy metal songs. They sound like Quartz to me. I love the band Quartz, and it really sounds like Quartz to me, some of this stuff. But The Shining was really good too. Big Geronimo riff, as I described those things. Yeah, I just feel like there's a little bit of 7th star to this in that this one got time to get worked over and over, and members in, members out, and all that kind of stuff. And I think it actually helps. I think the production, there's nothing wrong with the production on this. There's nothing 80s or 90s or like linked to a time. It's just good, solid, heavy analog production. And yeah, I just feel like all the best Tony Martin songs fell onto this record, and they just kind of didn't on the other ones. So there you go.
All right, number 7, Darren.
Okay, well, we Martin and I are the same on number 7. Eternal Idol is my number 7 pick as well. I think that everything you said I agree with, but I'd like to add that I think there's a cohesion there between past and in the present of the album. There's a definite Black Sabbath vibe when we talk about like Ancient Warrior. The Shining is a little bit more forward thinking. That kind of introduces a different element that would follow in albums later. But there is like there's a callback to some classic Sabbath moments in this, and what I appreciate about it is that it is Sabbath in the moment, and I think it's a great album. I like the fact that Bob Daisley's on it. It's kind of strange because he's kind of at this point bouncing between Ozzy and Sabbath. He's kind of like a traitor to one, maybe not to the other. I don't know, but it's kind of a strange thing. I like the production, as you said. Great debut for Tony Martin. I don't think that he had really developed his vocals as much as he would. I mean, at this point, I think he was kind of following the Ray Gillen template, but man, he can sing. And the way he belts it out on this album, it sends chills down my spine. I love his voice. I love the riffs. I think it's a fantastic album. It's a 10 out of 10 record for me. And my number 7.
Nice.
Awesome. All right, my number 7, I don't have it on vinyl and I couldn't find my CD cover, but No More Tears. Darren had this one on his list earlier. This almost didn't get on my list because I think maybe the sort of same sentiment as you, Darren. I thought maybe it was too radio, and I prefer Ozzy, and is maybe as childish as it is sometimes, the whole bat and gothic-y bats and castles phase of Ozzy. I like when he's singing hammer horror type lyrics, courtesy of Bob Daisley. But there's no denying that, man, the songwriting on this record, and Ozzy moved himself into the 90s and he set himself up. Now, you could call it luck. You could call it a savvy business decision. You could say someone in his camp, sensed something in the wind was coming, that something being grunge. But Ozzy manages to get this album out. It turns out to be like one of his biggest sellers. And it pretty much helps Ozzy ride through the whole grunge thing, the same way that the Black Album was able to carry Metallica through the 90s, when a lot of other bands just faded away into oblivion, at least through the 90s. And I'm a sucker for Ozzy ballads. I say that all the time. This has some of my favorites: Road to Nowhere, Time After Time, Mama, I'm Coming Home. It's just an album that feels like Ozzy. It's a more sophisticated Ozzy. Even I wish I could have found the cover, but the cover, even the cover is Ozzy, or like a portrait of him. He's getting away from the bats, the demons, the comic-y thing of like the Ultimate Sin album cover. It's a more mature Ozzy. He's stepping into this godfather of heavy metal mantle that he still holds to this day. This title track, No More Tears, is a fantastic epic. You mentioned Bob Daisley comes in at the last minute here to play bass on this. We've got a lot of other people joining in on the songwriting, like Lemmy on Mama, I'm Coming Home, and Hellraiser. That's fun. Even the deep cuts on here are cool. Zombie Stomp, AVH. So maybe it doesn't have some of the medieval classical tones that you get on the early stuff, but to me, it's a mature Ozzy. It brought Ozzy into the 90s, and it pretty much carried him through the 90s. And as much as I would rather have Ozzy doing the more classically tinged, hammer horror type stuff, whenever I put this record on, it's just a fun record. It's super well produced. You can put headphones on and just really appreciate it. So that is my number 7. Okay, we are at number 6.
All right, my number 6, I went with Blizzard of Oz. I think oddly, I look at my whole list, I've only got it at number 6, but I think this and Dehumanizer and maybe my number 1 are the most creative, artistically fearless albums, or creatively fearless artistic albums, however you want to put it. The albums with a lot of personality and albums that just don't seem to fit what's going on and maybe surprised you a little. But it's at number 6 because it surprised us as kids in a not a good way, because when this came out, we thought it was pretty darn commercial sounding. It wasn't very heavy. And we expected it to, me and the buddies expected it to be kind of heavier. I mean, I used to always call both I Don't Know and Crazy Train kind of disco-y, right? And Steal Away is just kind of melodic, and it's got a ballad or two, and No Bone Movies, kind of a party rocking tune. But I do love the idea that it is kind of the unexpected. Now, after a lot of years, I appreciate it even more for being something that just didn't go full on new wave of British heavy metal heavy. And yes, you can hear a lot of personality, even in the drums. You can hear personality in the drums, in the lyrics, in the guitars, and Ozzy's voice, of course, has a lot of personality as well, right? It's I mentioned Dehumanizer as kind of artistic. I think this is pretty artistic on this list, and even though I have it down at 6, I think it's one of the more admirable records on here that doesn't feel like it has too much second guessing to it. They're just being themselves and doing what comes natural, kind of thing.
It's awesome. All right, number 6, Darren, for you.
Number 6 for me is No Rest for the Wicked. The album kind of surprised me when it came out. There was a bit of an Ozzy reinvention for this album. He had a new guitar player, and he kind of reminded me of Randy Rhoads a little bit. He was a young guy, blonde hair. There's a lot of, I guess, the first photo session, there's a lot of pictures of Ozzy with Zach. And when I first heard Zach, it did kind of reminded me a little bit of Randy. And of course, as things would go on, then Zach developed a style of pinch harmonics that became pretty overwhelming. But I think at this point, it did have that fast, riffy vibe to it that was at the time for me very reminiscent of a Randy Rhoads. Songs are good. Some of them really, like Martin mentioned, Miracle Man's a great song. Bloodbath in Paradise, Devil's Daughter. I mean, they're heavy, not dark heavy, but maybe there's a little bit of an LA vibe to it. But for what I was hoping for at the time, it pretty much fulfilled that. Did I mention Bob Daisley is on this record? Which is cool. But anyway, yeah, I think it's good. I also like, when I first got it, I got it on cassette, and I think side 2 ends with the song Demon Alcohol. But the tape, I was listening to it with a headset and a Walkman, and Demon Alcohol got to the end of Demon Alcohol, and then it started to trail into another song, and it wasn't listed on the cassette, but I loved the song at the time, and I still love the song. I think it's called The Liar.
Yeah.
But it wasn't listed on the cassette. So that was kind of cool that it had that little element of surprise in it too. Fire in the Sky, the song The Liar, as well as like the more high energy tunes. I think it makes for a really good album. And it was cool that it seemed like Ozzy gained some ground, or he got a new foothold on his career. Coming out of The Ultimate Sin, which is kind of a downer for me. I didn't really like the album that much. I'm not sure if it was the production or the songs, or maybe even the way Ozzy looked. He looked like a fat lady in a circus or something. And seeing him perform with Metallica on that tour, and Metallica just blew him away. I think I left that concert and I was really disappointed with Ozzy. But coming back with No Rest for the Wicked, yeah, I was back on board again. So yeah, it cracks my top 10.
Nice. Okay, my number 6, both you guys have mentioned this already, is The Eternal Idol. I agree with everything that you guys said. For me, it's the last solid 10 out of 10 Black Sabbath album. For me, Seventh Star was a little too bright. It was missing some of the darkness that I crave with Black Sabbath. This seemed to corrected that for me. I love the title track here, The Eternal Idol. It is just so doomy, such an awesome way to end the record. It's full of all these triumphant riffs, like you mentioned, Martin, Ancient Warrior, Hard Life to Love, Glory Ride. The opening track, The Shining, is just awesome. I think Tony Martin's voice sounds fantastic on it. I think that the production is really good. And it's the last Sabbath album that I feel like I could sort of imagine some of these songs happening before this. I could imagine some of these riffs being written during the Dio era. Once we get into Headless Cross and Tear, I just can't picture Ozzy or Dio singing over any of those riffs. But this one I can. It feels like after this one, a new chapter sort of starts in the band, which is strange because it's the first Tony Martin album, but it doesn't feel like the first Tony Martin album. Like you mentioned, Darren, he was imitating what was already recorded by Ray Gillen. I don't think Tony Martin really comes into himself until Headless Cross, but always love this record, love the cover, love the production, and Bob Daisley's on it. Let's keep shouting out to Bob Daisley.
One thing I want to mention, I forgot to mention, the song Nightmare has that really cool bluesy bouncy vibe that to me kind of harkens back to the looser earlier
like
days
Thrill of It All off of Sabotage. You know, it sort of has that like kind of like a funky kind of groove to it. Something they would have done in the 70s, you know?
Yeah.
With Bill Ward. If Bill Ward was there, you know, you can totally hear Bill swinging, you know, on that.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, here's where it starts getting really tough here. We're splitting atoms, I think, at this point here. We're number 5. What do you got? Your number 5, Martin.
Okay, my number 5, I went with Diary of a Madman. This is not my favorite Ozzy album. We did a whole Contrarians episode where, we have to, argue for a contrary choice if we feel it in our heart of hearts for a certain band. And my favorite album by just a little bit is Bark at the Moon. But Diary, I think it really all comes together. This has got some absolutely killer songs on here, especially Over the Mountain, Little Dolls. I love the closing Diary of a Madman and Believer, and both of those are quite proggy. I think they really they really turn up the metal quotient and get rid of any sort of confusing signals on this one. SATO I love to death as well. You Can't Kill Rock and Roll is a little bit of this one's, and Flying High Again are a little bit no bone movies on this one, I suppose a little bit, but I think the production's better as well, even though it was recorded very, very closely after, wasn't long after. But yeah, I think there's a lot of fireworks on here. I think it's Randy's best work. And just a solid album start to finish. He can do no wrong. He's doing great at this point. But again, along this theme of why these things might be a little lower, I'm only putting it number 5 is I just feel like the Ozzy camp and even the Sabbath camp, it's all a little too considered, a little too LA, a little too managed, and that's why my Ozzy stuff is showing up lower than my Sabbath stuff.
Okay, what do you got for number 5, Darren?
I hope we're not getting redundant here, but we seem to be all on the same page as far as our picks. Number 5 for me is Dehumanizer. And we talked about this on one of our, I guess one of our Sabbath Sundays. But the thing about this album that I look back on fondly was the element of surprise. I think it was still at the time. I know for me it was well before the internet. So if I didn't read about it in a magazine or something, I didn't know it was coming out. And remember, I was getting ready to go to the shore or on a trip of some sort, and I went into the record store to buy a couple cassettes to listen to in the car, and I saw Dehumanizer, and right away I was excited by the album cover artwork. And then when I flipped it over and I saw that Dio was back in the band, and I had no knowledge of that prior to seeing this album, I was really, really psyched. I put it on. Came on heavy with the sound effects in the beginning of Computer God. Like you said, Martin, the more up tempo songs like Time Machine, that's a great song. TV Crimes. There's a lot of material on the album, but I'm going to say that I like every single song on it. There's some up tempo rockers, some real driving, hard rhythm songs, and then there's some slow, doomy moments after all, and the crushing weight of I think in a lot of ways, and maybe it's a little bit hindered by the production, that the production is a little bit it's a little flat. There's not a lot of dynamics in the production. It's there, it's audible, but it's just a little bit unexciting, if that makes any sense. But in spite of that, I think it might be the most successful, in my opinion, album of the Dio era, because there's a lot of different vibes going on. Like I said, there's the slow brooding vibe of some of the songs. There's the faster tempo stuff, and there's this. And I also think it's the last album that Dio's voice really sounded good. I think it starts to diminish pretty quickly after this. So, yeah. Dehumanizer cracked my top 5. I love it.
Nice.
All right, number 5 for me is Bark at the Moon. This one for me sonically has a feel like Diary of a Madman. In some ways, I think it's sonically closer to Diary of a Madman than Diary of a Madman is to Blizzard. It has a little bit of that sort of reverby, atmospheric type sound to it. I loved it as a kid when it came out. Bark at the Moon to me is this kind of a signature Ozzy thing. You're No Different, Night, awesome ballad. Now You See It, Now You Don't, Rock and Roll Rebel, side 2, Center of Eternity. I think I love the bell and the riffing in that. And the way the album ends on Waiting for Darkness, it doesn't live up to the majesty of the song Diary of a Madman, but it has that same sort of epic kind of vibe to it. It's got the strings at the end and it builds just really nicely and everything. So I just love the mood and the vibe and atmosphere of this record. So that is my number 5, Bark at the Moon. All right, Martin, you are number 4.
Okay, my number 4 is Bark at the Moon. And I love this album to death. I agree with what you say, John. I mean, I do feel like it has, the guitars are so up front and center as they are on Diary. And there's just there's some really cool subtleties to some of the chord sequences and chord changes, especially Now You See It, Now You Don't. Slow Down, I think, is a really good song. Rock and Roll Rebel, Rock and Roll Rebel seems like just a pretty simple sort of song, but I think this is like it's the rowdy party song that is actually heavy at the same time that you get out of Ozzy. I think it just kicks ass, that one. And of course, Bark of the Moon's amazing with the really, the really dense, quick right hand feel to that one. But yeah, Waiting for Darkness is great as well. Center of Eternity is so heavy. It's really commendable that they could make a record like this when metal is still pretty young, and we've just gone through the new wave of British heavy metal, and nothing particularly super crazy innovative or well put together came out of that. Possibly some Maiden and maybe the Angel Witch and the Quartz and maybe more and things like that. But I think that the one reason the new wave of British heavy metal had to die is that it never rose to the performance level and the production level that you got out of hair metal, or in the interim records like this and Diary and Scorpions Blackout, really. So it's quite commendable. There's no roadmap to make songs this good and this heavy, that are heavy and commercial at the same time. There's just nothing kind of leading to it. It's just Ozzy's doing this great work on his own, of course, with his great band as well, super talented band. So my favorite Ozzy album, and that's my number 4.
Awesome. Well said, Martin. Number 4, Darren?
Number 4 for me is Heaven and Hell. It's great songs on the album. There's a couple that are a little lackluster, but I think it's part of the transitional phase that the band was going through at the time. But Children of the Sea is such a great song. One of my all-time favorite Black Sabbath songs. Heaven and Hell, the title track, is a heavy metal anthem. Just a fantastic song. To put it in historical context, of course, we all know that the album prior to this, Never Say Die, was sort of the lowest point of the original Ozzy era Black Sabbath. And for a band to reinvent themselves in the way that they did, or maybe it was just Tony and Ronnie, actually, more accurately, but to put things back on course and on a different course, the way that they did, was really commendable. And I think the album is really successful. And there were some things that could have derailed, but I think that the album came together really well. By all accounts, that tour was pretty successful, and it went on to the next album. And so it at least hung in there for a couple years. But yeah, it's a great album, and it kind of, whereas Never Say Die ends the 70s and it kind of peters out. 1980, Black Sabbath, the reinvention of this iconic band, it just really just jumped into the 80s with a real forceful and commanding manner. And Martin, you mentioned the new wave of British heavy metal and what it lacked in performance and some of the production quality. Another example of that, and you obviously cited Bark at the Moon. I would say that Heaven and Hell, even though it's a few years earlier, Heaven and Hell coming out in that new wave of British heavy metal era showed all the youngins, so to speak, how it's done. And, with the air of professionalism, which is, I think pretty commendable, again, because of where they were coming from Never Say Die, and how they got things back on track and shifted gears for Heaven and Hell. So number 4,
nice.
Heaven and Hell.
All right, number 4 for me is also Heaven and Hell. I echo everything that you said. It is a confident album. I'm not sure there were many other singers that could have come in and made a statement like this. You think about the way Neon Nights just comes charging out of your speakers. I mean, there's no, let's feel our way around with this and see what people are going to be like. It does feel like a statement record, like we're back. We can hang with the kids as well as anybody. And I say this all the time, 1980 was this year where there was just something in the subconscious, the collective consciousness of all these bands that they all sort of tightened their production, they tightened their songwriting, they left behind some of the jammy experimental elements of the 70s. You think about all the albums that landed in 1980, and it just, you know, some people foreshadowed this. You know, you could say the Scorpions a little bit with like Love Drive and Animal Magnetism. Motorhead a little bit with their records, but you know, Black Sabbath just shows up ready for the 80s. It doesn't sound like an album doesn't sound like a 1978 album or something like that. It sounds like it's got a foot firmly planted in the 80s. Martin Birch's strong, clear, tight, punchy production. Heaven and Hell is a heavy metal anthem for the ages. Maybe Walk Away, the only song that sort of drops this album down from being an absolutely golden stone cold classic. But just, man, everything about it is so regal and majestic. The picture on the back is just so sophisticated. It's so intelligent. Dio is just absolutely in his element here. Just love it. Amazing album. Number 4 for me. All right, Martin, number 3.
Okay, number 3, I went with Born Again. And the funny thing about Born Again for me is that for years and years and years, it was all about side 1. And then years later, I just totally got into side 2, and I got into those rock and rollsy kind of like Digital Bitch and you know, and Born Again itself as the song, I used to find it boring, but now I find it really atmospheric and cool. I love that description of the production. That's pretty cool. But I really like the whole atmosphere of it. Gillan is one of my favorite bands of all time. I just love every single Gillan album. And so I hear that aggressive, you know, hard drinking vocal fry Ian Gillan on here, you know, just tossing off these crazy lyrics. And I just find that it is so of a space and so atmospheric on its own. You know, Trashed is very different from Zero the Hero and Disturbing the Priest on that side, but the other side all kind of really hangs together for me in some strange way, because it's all just it's almost like Tony is meeting Ian halfway all through that whole side. And on the first side, it's more like, no, you know, Ian, you're showing up here, but we're doing my kind of songs here, kind of thing. So yeah, I've just always loved Born Again. I think that production, you know, once you play it and you're playing a few songs and you adjust your tones and all that stuff, you kind of end up forgetting about the production and not hating it so much. But to me, it's again, we're on this theme of artistic and creatively fearless and strange and just doing something unexpected and maybe uncommercial. And I feel you get more of that on a more frequent level on the Sabbath side of things. So my list is leaning Sabbath. So there you go.
Well said. Well said. All right, Darren, you're number 3.
So my number 3 is Mob Rules. I love this album. I said before in either our podcast or another video that not only is it it's obviously in my top 3 Black Sabbath albums, and I will say top 5 of all time, but it's also my favorite heavy metal album of all time, or at least way up there. It checks all the boxes. It has Dio as commanding as he was on Heaven and Hell. Goes a little further with that. He goes down deeper. He gets like a growl, a snarl, as well as the more angelic, you know, lighter vocal things that he does. The songs come together in a way that sound more confident. The production, Martin Birch's production, I think is perfect. I think it's perfectly suitable to the songs. And as a heavy metal album, I think it has deep bass. It has guitar that it just kind of has that right position in the mix where it just reaches out and grabs you. The riffs are really effective. They're very noticeable. The drums. This is how I wish Born Again sounded, because I think I would probably love Born Again. I'm also a big Ian Gillan fan, and I love the Gillan stuff, as well as, of course, Deep Purple. But you know, not to regress and get back into Born Again, but the thing that really kills it for me with Born Again is that there's so little clarity among the instruments and in the mix. And I wish that it had that Martin Birch Mob Rules sound, because everything is just, the quality of the songs is good, but the way that the production just works with the songs just really makes it a lot more effective. I love the album cover. Yeah, I mean, it's a great album. It's a fantastic album. Mob Rules, number 3.
Cool.
Nice. All right, my number 3. Man, I feel guilty putting this at number 3 because this was such an important album to me as a 10-year-old. Blizzard of Oz. I just such memories wrapped up in this album. Randy Rhoads, my favorite guitar player of all time. This album just set the pattern for me for certain things that I love in heavy rock and heavy metal. Revelation, Mother Earth, the tolling bell, the classical, medieval, gothic vibe to it. Randy's playing, when that song picks up speed and goes into that double time thing with Randy playing those licks there, it's just epic beyond belief for me. That organ intro to Mr. Crowley is just sends a shiver up my spine. I don't know, Crazy Train, the gentle acoustic D, and the way it goes into Suicide Solution with that slide down on the guitar. I just love it. Ozzy sounds great. It's a band, like I think it was Martin, you said this earlier, not really going in with any kind of game plan except just feeding off of each other, and just writing songs as a group together. And it works for me. Everybody had Ozzy counted out, but then this album showed up. The album cover is absolutely epic and atmospheric, the smoke and everything. What else can I say about it? Goodbye to Romance. Love the guitar solo in it. Just a fantastic, amazing album. But it comes in at number 3 for me, Blizzard of Oz. All right, here we are. We're turning the corner. Martin, your number 2 pick.
Number 2, I'm going with Mob Rules. To me, this record is a little bit of Black Sabbath's Bark at the Moon. It's one where the artistic level is kind of down, but it's more about taking care of business. And Darren, like you say, it checks all the boxes. It is just absolutely all about business. You get a Martin Birch production on here that sounds nothing like other Martin Birch productions because it has a lot of bass to it. And I love your description of what the guitar does on here, because I think the guitar does reach out and grab you, but it reaches out and grabs you because it has command of the mids and the lows. And then on Heaven and Hell, it reaches out and grabs you, but it's all about the mids on that one. So yeah, and I love the songs on here. Country Girl was always a cool one. I thought that had kind of an old, more melodic, sorrowful feel to it. Falling Off the Edge of the World is just so sinister in the riff. Sign of the Southern Cross is just heavy. Yeah, good heavy album. And it's my favorite Martin Birch production because it does take care of the bottom end the best. But again, I think we're in, even Heaven and Hell is in a zone where the band is not as creatively just giving her and doing whatever we want as they do, even on Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, but not to mention Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath and Sabotage. Sabotage is my favorite album of all time by anybody. So I think that the second guessing and being a little more corporate is already there on the first Dio album, and then it's even there a little more on this one. But it just, that idea of taking care of business and turning in just a fabulous album start to finish really wins you over. And to me, that's why it's kind of like their Bark at the Moon a little more than Dire or Blizzard is like a Heaven and Hell.
Cool. All right, Darren, you're number 2.
Okay. Number 2 for me is Diary of a Madman. I wrestled with this because I as soon as we talked about doing the show and putting top 10 from 1980, Black Sabbath and Ozzy, I knew right away it was going to be Diary of a Madman. But then I started to think, well, maybe not. But it's definitely got to be in the top 3. So number 2 it is. This album for me has a lot of personal significance. It was my first concert. Ozzy and UFO. Magnum opened. Wasn't really crazy about Magnum, but UFO was like culture shock, as well as the crowd. I mean, I was 12 years old, 12 or 13, and I had never been to a heavy metal concert before, and just, you know, the whole ambiance, the smell, the sights, you know, the whole atmosphere of the show, and then getting into the arena and watching UFO, who to me, I mean, I had very little familiarity with UFO at the time. I'd heard a few songs. I heard Lights Out, Doctor Doctor, but I guess it was on the I know it was on the Mechanics tour, and hearing that stuff, and it was real high energy, pretty heavy, heavier than what I expected. But watching UFO and seeing Pete Way collapse on stage, and they're visibly intoxicated, you know, as well as the people that were around me at the time, kind of built into this experience. And for me, it all is involved with Diary of a Madman. When Ozzy came out with the Castle set, and unfortunately Randy had passed away at this point, and I saw him with Brad Gillis, but nevertheless, it brought the album, the gothic vibe, John, like you said, the medieval vibe, was it came across on stage, the costumes and the scenery. So I had the album prior to seeing Ozzy, and I loved the album. But after the concert, I got even more into the album, and then I became like an Ozzy fan for life. It was Ozzy. Ozzy was everything for most of that year, and I guess in the following years as well. But Diary of a Madman. As far as the music itself, I love the drum fill in the beginning of Over the Mountain. It just kicks things off in a real forceful way. It's one of the reasons I decided I wanted to play drums. When I started hearing drums like that, I'm like, man, I want to do that. Then, you know, I really attracted to that sort of thing. Randy's guitar playing is phenomenal, innovative, but so melodic. Songs within songs, as I've described it before. There's like layers. It's like an onion. You peel back the layers, and there's just so much involved with this album, from production to songs to solos to bass lines to drum fills to vocal melodies. You know, it's just, to me, it's a perfect album, and it always will be. And I love this album to death. So number 2 for me, Diary of a Madman.
Right on, right on.
Nice.
All right.
I'll put.
Number two for me is Mob Rules. I think both you guys have mentioned Mob Rules at this point. Same thing that you guys said. It's just, it's such a metal album. It has so much power to it. In some ways, it follows the template a little bit from Heaven and Hell. You know, Turn Up the Night is a little bit Neon Nights, but man, oh man, Sign of the Southern Cross is just, this is something. Songs like that, only gods and Mount Olympus write songs like this. It is just so heavy. It's such an awesome song. It's one of my favorite Dio performances of all time. Falling Off the Edge of the World, man, just the dynamics in it, Dio's delivery at the beginning of that. Country Girl, one of the rare instances where Dio follows the riff a la the way Ozzy used to, but man, it just works. It's so heavy. The title track coming out of E5150, that weird what is going on thing, and then all of a sudden Mob Rules just comes out swinging at you. Voodoo has this nasty groove to it and chugging. Vinny Appice comes in here, and Vinny Appice, Martin, I always steal this line from you. It's probably not exactly what you said. I've twisted it over the years, but you described Vinny Appice something like, it sounds like he's throwing boulders when he plays, when he does his drum fills. And I always think of that. He is the man of the slow drum fill. When he just does those massive fills, his drum set just takes up so much sonic space. One of the rare drummers that I can just tell who it is just by his drum sound. When he just plays a simple bass snare pattern. Man, it is just so crushing. It's so heavy. It's all over this record. Dio, the riffs, Geezer's bass is like way up front and distorted and just driving a lot of these songs like Voodoo and everything. It's just absolutely killer classic album. I love the picture on the front of it. It's just so full of like what is going on here. It's kind of scary, and it's just the whole vibe of the whole record. It's just like there's this gang mentality that they had at this point, coming charging out at you and taking no prisoners. All right, that's my number 2. We're here at the finish line now. All right, Martin, number 1.
All right, well, I had to go for where it all starts, Heaven and Hell. I've taken a lot of polls about in various books over the years, and this album's really there are armies of Sabbath fans that this is their favorite Sabbath album of all time. So this is rivaling a lot of the Ozzy stuff for a lot of fans. And the song Heaven and Hell is way up song lists all the time. This is a typical Martin Birch production, but it's so intrinsically Martin Birch beyond Reddy and Waylon or any of the early Maiden stuff, this is more like Fire of Unknown Origin than Cultosaurus Erectus, because it crowds everything into that mid space where it's really bright and commercial and just like drilling right at you, right into your ears. It sounds like everybody's standing on the lip of the stage delivering this album. And the songs are great. I mean, I would add to Walk Away. I would add Wishing Well to it as not that great. And I'm not crazy about the Lady Evil. Sounds just a little bit too cliche in its sort of tropes, but the whole rest of it is just really, really cool. Even like Lonely Is the Word, of course, as well. Die Young, my favorite, one of my favorite Sabbath moments all time is that, the big hail and the move, and then they go into it when Dio does that. That is so cool. But in terms of this theme of creative and being artistic and not being too like commercial and looking what's going on out there, I think they do a great job of that here. But I still think Dehumanizer is a bigger surprise, as you say. Well, it was a surprise to you in a different way, Darren. It was more of an information surprise, but I'm sure the record surprised you as well with the slowness and so that and like I say, I think Diary is also, Blizzard of Oz also has that crazy creativity to it. This one is almost like the creativity is all in the complete reinvention more than anything. But it definitely is very commercial, accessible, no fat. The arrangements are pretty simple on it. It's certainly way different than Never Say Die when it comes to arrangements, right? There's no krautrock on it, for example. Great album. Never get tired of it. It's not hard on the ears in any way. It's just really accessible. And it just felt like, a list like this was all pointing towards it. It has to start here at the beginning. It has to be Sabbath for me. It can't really be Ozzy, because again, it's Sabbath just seems like the more serious band of these two.
Yeah.
Right on. All right, Darren, you're number 1.
Number 1 for me is Blizzard of Oz. When it comes to Ozzy or Sabbath, it's really tough to make the call. But again, this is my favorite it's number 1 because of mostly personal experience and memories. Getting the album, the immediate impact that it had when I first heard Randy's riff of I Don't Know. For me, in my experience of hard rock and probably more soon to be heavy metal, it was, and maybe for you, Martin, you're a little older, I'm assuming, maybe a couple months, but
few years. I'm 59 next month, so 58 right now.
So your experience with heavier stuff was, you were already experienced with the heavier stuff. Me, I was just sort of cutting my teeth. So Crazy Train for me was a really good song because it had that dark vibe, but then it kind of lightened up and and you referred to it as sort of disco-ish, and yeah, it did have kind of a bouncy feel. So it was kind of safe in a way, but it was also kind of like a way that I could start to get into the heavier sounds of darker hard rock music. This was the album that pretty much did it. It introduced that vibe to me. But in addition to that, I mean, I just liked reading the articles in the magazine, seeing pictures of Ozzy. The band sounds great. I love Bob Daisley's bass. I love how everything sort of interconnects. There's the drums and the bass kind of weaves around the drums and the lead guitar, and I love Randy's riffs, and his leads are so perfect. It was just it made a real big impression on me at the time. And before we came on the air, John and I were talking about how there are certain albums that for a while we had to get away from because we just got burned out on them. And I had said that, AC/DC Back in Black was an early album that I got into, and I couldn't listen to for a while because I was just so burned out on it. But then all of a sudden, after many years, I just got to a point where I can listen to it anytime. It's a perfect album. And there was a point in time when Blizzard of Oz was sort of that way for me too. I'd heard it so many times, and I'd hear Crazy Train on the radio, or I'd hear Suicide Solution on the radio, or Mr. Crowley, and I'd be like, much as I love Ozzy, I gotta change the channel. I've heard this way too many times. But now so many years later, I can put this album on at any time, and I can listen to it from start to finish, and it still sounds good. So definitely stood the test of time for me. And I mean, it was hard to decide. I mean, I guess technically Diary of a Madman is probably a better album, production wise, songwriting, performance, but for me, I'm just more attached to Blizzard of Oz. So when it came to the 1 to 10 Ozzy Sabbath mix, had to be Blizzard of Oz. So number one for me, Blizzard of Oz.
Nice.
All right, my number one, Diary of a Madman. It's just such a special album. It has so much atmosphere to it for me, whereas Blizzard, the production is a little dry on Blizzard. This one just has so much feel to it. Those drums, like you mentioned, Darren, at Over the Mountain, the way the album kicks off with that sinister riff. Randy's solos are just, every one of them are fantastic. I love You Can't Kill Rock and Roll. That evil bass line at the beginning of Believer, and that twisted line that Randy plays over the top of it. Tonight, again, I love when Ozzy does ballads, and this is one of my favorite Ozzy ballads. Bob Daisley's melodic bass playing in that song, and great bass playing across the whole record, and Randy's outro solo on that can bring a tear to my eye as that song fades. I can't tell you how many times as a kid I would sit turning up the dial there to just catch every last note that Randy had for us there on Tonight. SATO, it just has such atmosphere to it. I love the lyrics, the symbolism, the ocean thing, the ships, everything is just so cool. And the way that song ends with that repeated dun 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 dun, and that Diary of a Madman, a guitar comes in. There's a handful of songs in my life that can take me back to a very specific moment in my childhood. And that was staying up, should have been in bed, had my headphones on, crowded under the glow of my stereo. So my parents thought I was asleep, and they were going to play a new song from the new Ozzy record, and I had to hear it. And they played Diary of a Madman, and hearing that guitar at the beginning, I'm getting a shiver up my spine thinking about it. Ozzy's vocal delivery, the choir at the end, the way the whole song just ends in that, oh man, it is just, to me, the perfect heavy metal song. It just made such an impact on me. Talking about it, I am back in my room as an 11-year-old, just sitting there, and I hear that song. Darren, you mentioned songs that you've gotten burnt out over the years. Diary of a Madman is one of those songs that I can just listen to over and over again. It takes me back to my youth. I hear new things in it every time. I just absolutely love it. It's like the Stairway to Heaven of heavy metal for me or something. It's just so epic, so classic. Cool. All right, there you go. This was a really hard list to do. Thank you guys for doing this. Thank you, Martin, for joining us here. on Sabbath Sunday to do the impossible here, to list our 10 favorite 1980 on Ozzy and Sabbath records. Martin, you got anything that you're working on that you want to share with people out there? Any future things happening?
The Dio book is selling really well. I'm halfway through what I printed. So that's martinpopoff.com for all the books. I sign them and send them out here from the office. And we've got the Contrarians channel. And I've got my podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The last episode was all on pub rock. What are we? 144 episodes, and this is I can definitely say that all the songs I picked for this episode, I hate them all. So I definitely do not like pub rock, but I figured I'd give the whole history of pub rock for this episode. But yeah, the Dio book and then those visual histories. I ran out of the UFO and the priest, but I'm getting more. So priest visual history, UFO visual history, martinpopoff.com.
Awesome. Yeah. And definitely check out, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, but the Contrarians is Martin's YouTube channel that he does with his Tim, right? Is your
Mark? Yeah. Well, Tim, Marco's the
right. Fantastic. Love it. They take albums, the Dark Horse albums. They take just all kinds of discussion, deep dive discussions on records. It's fantastic. And his History in 5 Songs podcast is just awesome. Also, I will leave links to all that down below. Thank you again, Martin. And we'll see you all on the next Sabbath Sunday.